Hi, Levy Church. I don't know if you're watching this in the afternoon or the evening, so I'm not really able to say good afternoon or good day or good morning. Just wanted to greet you and offer some thoughts. I know that your church is going through a series on mental health, and kind of considering the times we're in, that seems like a very appropriate response to what's going on right now. You probably don't know me. My name is Cody Willis, and I have a counseling practice, Arkansas Family Care Associates. I got to know Dr. Pogue about 8 years ago. Sherry and I were in supervision together with Dr. Barry Wingfield, and I had some struggling practice in Searcy, and she said, "Why don't you come work in our office?" And I said, "Okay." So I've been working with the Pogues for a number of years, since about 2011, and about a year ago I bought his practice prior to them moving to France. We had a long working relationship, and I really appreciated his perspective on a lot of things. So we worked well together, and he offered for me to buy his practice. I'm originally from Dallas, just to give you a little background history on who I am. Grew up in the church there. The church is strong where I'm from. Had kind of the dyed-in-the-wool card-carrying experience of the Church of Christ. My grandfather and his family planted churches in the 20s and 30s across North Texas. So I kind of grew up that way. And then I ended up at Harding in the mid-90s and pursued a master's in marriage and family therapy, and that's kind of what I do today. I'm what they call a licensed professional counselor, an LPC, but I got my master's in marriage and family therapy, which is a little different than some therapy programs, I think, because we think along a systemic framework or a systemic line. Originally I started out doing youth ministry, and that's kind of where I started meeting with people and getting to know families and the structure of families and the way families interacted and worshiped together, and kind of observed that in the larger context of a church where we had not just one family, but we had multiple families. And I noticed at my church, kind of probably something that most churches notice, that we have people that sit over here all the time, and they don't like really moving from their seats, and we have people that sit over here all the time, and they kind of stay where they're at, and they have sort of a crew that they go with, and they kind of all sit together. And how do those groups interact? How do those groups relate to each other, and how does that influence the way the church operates, and how does the church operations influence the way the community operates, or the group of churches? How do they influence the community? So I kind of had this systemic framework going even from a young age, and watched how that worked. One of the things that marriage and family therapists consider is how the interactions and the dynamics within a family, the culture that the family may live in, like the South or Texas or maybe Europe. Those are, all maybe three diverse cultures. And then you may have racial cultures, or you may have inter-race cultures. You may have Christian cultures and non-Christian cultures within one family. How do all those things interact, and how do they bear out in the life of an individual or the life of a family over time? We call that kind of a systemic perspective. So that's kind of where I came from, and the line of thinking I work through. I've seen some families interact one way and other families interact another way, and you never really can tell exactly how it's going to bear out on the life of a child, or how it did bear out on the life of the children in a given family. Those are all considerations for me when I'm thinking about mental health. So maybe we can kind of explore a few of those things as we kind of visit today. I hope this thing finds you doing well. It's a pleasure to be able to talk with you about mental health. And basically, we're just going to go through some thumbnail sketches of what might be some general mental health guidelines and considerations for an individual, perhaps some solutions if you're struggling with any one thing in particular. And I want to say kind of off first, I'm not really a give all the answers type person because I don't have all the answers. I'm just a normal human being like everybody else. A lot of people think therapists, have some kind of, or at least I did. We have Jedi mind tricks, or we have magic tricks, or we have spells, or something we could cast, and that would be fantastic. I would love a crystal ball, or a magic wand, or anything else. And if you know where I can pick up an effective one, I am all ears. I would go and buy that today. But I don't really give a whole lot of answers. I more pursue perhaps questions, and see how my answer has been shaped in the past. See maybe what my answer might lead to if I were to select that one, or do I need to maybe consider some other options. So to say that, if we were going to look at maybe anxiety or depression, I don't think it's in all of our best interest to look today at the symptoms of those things, or effective treatment methodologies or anything like that. I think that's getting kind of lost in the weeds. My experience with most people is, well, let's consider maybe where did that come from? Where do these things crop up? How do they originate within a person, or in do they come through a family system? Is it genetic? Is it nurture versus nature? Sometimes we hear that argument. I would say all the diagnostic things and effective treatment modality considerations, a lot of those things, if you were to Google them, you would find as many different answers for treatment methods as you probably would find websites. Some of them will overlap, and I think some of the consistent research is really helpful. But otherwise, again, I think you can get lost in the weeds in that. So when I'm thinking about depression or anxiety, maybe there's other things out there that are kind of a little less popular, like an adjustment disorder. People may have difficulty transitioning from one town to the next when they move to college, or switching jobs, or having a child. Some of those big transitions can be kind of an adjustment, and sometimes the death of a spouse or a loved one can be an adjustment, and that would be where you might find what they call an adjustment disorder. Those are expected to resolve, or at least have enough resolution within 6 or 7 months to move on with what they would maybe consider the new normal, right? Everyone's kind of let the dust settle a little bit, but if it's something maybe a little deeper, after 6 months, you kind of start looking at something else. So maybe depression or anxiety. Maybe they left home and they've never left home before, and now it's really a struggle for them. And 6 months in, they can still see that it's a big challenge. So they may be given some kind of different diagnosis. A marriage and family therapist traditionally does not really diagnose a whole lot. So even though I do for insurance purposes, I don't really like diagnoses because they tend to be very sticky. Meaning, if your insurance company were to see that you dealt with something in the past, they may choose to say, well, you'll never be free of that. Now, if it's an appropriate diagnosis, I have to give it because that's what's appropriate. But I don't want to give something that I think will be stuck to someone for life if I think they'll overcome it, and it's not an appropriate diagnosis for them. When I consider any person, I consider a person that I'm looking at, and I see three things. I see kind of a tripartite person, I guess you might say. I see a body, a mind, and a spirit. And so, in my consideration of what would be healthy for the mind, I think you cannot separate the spirit or the body, and vice versa for all three. If I was to consider what's healthy for the body, I wouldn't exclude the mind or the spirit from that. I think they have to work in unison with each other, and I want to attend to all three if I can, dealing with a person. When I see that happen, I see a health more apt to generate. So there's a guy out there named John Eldredge, and he's a really well-published Christian author. Some people love his work, some people hate his work. I'm kind of a big fan of his work. But he's also a licensed professional counselor, and he held a seminar a few years ago called Restoration of the Heart, in which he invited pastors, preachers, elders, Christians of all shapes and sizes, lay people that may consider themselves a minister of some sort. Then he invited professional counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists, psychiatrists, psychologists, the whole mental health professional field, and he invited physicians. He invited coaches. He invited physical therapists. So he's dealing with the body, the mind, and the spirit, and he's saying, why are the three of us not getting together more often? There were several hundred people in attendance at this conference. He's saying, why is it so hard for us to come to an agreement on things where mental health could actually be helped? Why do we have one camp sitting over in this corner saying, those two over there don't know anything? Or this camp over here saying, yeah, I like what they're saying, but I've never seen it work. We need chemical results. And so you do have sometimes people saying, and maybe you've heard this, if you've ever been on Lexapro or Seroquel or any other kind of psychotropic medication, maybe you've heard someone say, oh, they shouldn't be taking that. He's saying, well, why wouldn't you take that? If it helps your body and it helps your mind, maybe that would be useful, at least for a time. And what the research, I think, actually indicates is that counseling coupled with medication would be an effective thing. One kind of can complement the other. I'm not saying everyone should go get on meds. I'm certainly saying if somebody is on one, that might be healthy for them, and there's really not a good reason to down them. They may be using it, it's kind of sometimes the finger in the dam, or something that will relieve pressure somewhere so that they can think freely and operate the way that they were intended to. So I consider these three things whenever I'm looking at any one person or any given situation. I look at the body, mind, and spirit of each person. What I see is when one person is unbalanced in any kind of section there, if maybe they're really heavy on the spirit but not so heavy on taking care of their body, well, I see that imbalance create trouble for somebody. God says, your body is the temple, and don't harm it, and treat your bodies as a living sacrifice. He's clear on the body. Jesus deals with these mentally unstable people sometimes. He's got a guy in shackles, and he's got guys with demons in there. And so the mind and the spirit are not foreign to him. We know also that the Bible has also said, hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. What does that mean? I'm curious, where does this hope for what? Hope for children? There is a woman in the Bible that is very, very sad, it seems. She's struggling because she has no children and she thinks God's forgotten her. And so we see that hope for a child could be deferred, and that could make a heart grow sick. Some people are struggling right now, this very minute, with finances or freedoms. Just the ability to go outside and feel like I'm not going to be attacked or I'm not going to be unhealthy. I've been locked up in my house for too long. I'm sick of these walls, and that can really make someone struggle eventually. Hope deferred makes the heart grow sick. So these are things that I always consider when I'm looking at like an origin, maybe, of where would depression come from? Where would anxiety come from? Where would PTSD come from? I look at origins from early on. I like to consider things that may have gone on in somebody's life that would have had an impact on them in particular. And I can't judge or qualify that for any one person. The way I kind of see life is, I think a lot of our mental illnesses or emotional illnesses are trauma-based, meaning I think somebody has gone through some kind of experience that may relate traumatically to them. It may not be a trauma for everybody. There's something we consider maybe little t traumas, like wetting your pants in the third grade in front of everybody and everybody laughs at you, or not being picked for a team, or being broken up with. Those are little t traumas, right? They're not the end of the world, but they're maybe the end of that day, or they're certainly the end of that school year, or you may never live something down. When I think of large or big T traumas, capital T traumas, I think of sexual abuse. I think of physical abuse or domestic violence. Think of stillbirth, divorce, losing a child in a car crash, or losing an arm at war. I think of big T traumas or capital T traumas as massive marking events of my life. And the way I kind of define this trauma, for me, you could look it up in the DSM, they'd probably define it differently than I would. But my definition of trauma is anything that would change or influence the way you view life or do life in such a way that life seems less hopeful than it used to be. I think that pretty well includes everybody, which there's room to argue there. I know some would say, if it includes everybody, is it really traumatic? Yeah, it is. It really is. They read on the scale. You know, they do studies on people's brains whenever they go through trauma, and they can mark these events. They can say, when you talk about this thing from 20 years ago, this person's experiencing traumatic memories. This person is experiencing flashbacks. This person's experiencing bad dreams. They want to avoid talking about this subject altogether. There's things that when we go there, it's really uncomfortable for me, maybe. Or I just don't like to talk about those things. Typically what happens with trauma is we have kind of a shift in our brain from I'm doing just fine to I have to survive. You may go through that again in some of those big T traumas. You may go through that in some of those little T traumas. I think enough of either added up over time, couple that with maybe how the family addresses trauma or addresses emotional pain. Maybe you're in a certain circumstance with school, or you're in a certain culture, or you're going to a certain church that just doesn't believe in dealing with that. You know, you should just be lucky you're alive, or feel happy that you didn't have it as bad as this person over there. And we do this comparison trap thing. That would give anybody reason to experience depression or anxiety or the effects of long-term PTSD. And so when I think of origins, that's kind of how I think about it. Origins are highly individualized. I do believe that they're usually influenced or even rooted in some kind of trauma. And I think given a long period of time, they have a great effect on a person, body, mind, and spirit. So, just a couple of stories. I knew one kid. I worked at a drug rehab for boys, and we had a young man who had a big T trauma. He had witnessed his father's suicide, and he was involved in cleaning and repairing the things that were damaged when his father committed suicide. That's a big T trauma. That's going to stick with this young man for life, right? Another boy I know, everyone would have said he grew up in the perfect household. He was pretty perfect looking. He was a good looking guy. When I think of him, I think of Joseph. He was well built and handsome. I would have given anything to look like him. He was athletic. He had really gifted athleticism. He was a gifted performer. He had a chosen art, and he performed well. He was intelligent. He was always on A, B honor roll. His family was from upper middle class. They weren't, destitute or impoverished or anything like that. I don't know. He grew up in a church home. He grew up in a Christian family that really strived to serve God. And it seemed to me that his traumas might not be the same as this young man. And they're not the same. But not the same, some people would say they're not equal. I think they have the same impact on him. What he experienced in his life was a long series of little t traumas. He had a sibling who was just a little smarter, just a little better looking. They were a paid model, and they had it all in the bag with athleticism and performing arts and things like that. And so whenever this sibling, who was a little older, graduated, and he came along, they would say, "Oh, you're so-and-so's little brother. Oh, how is so-and-so? How are they? How are they doing? Are they off at college?" They'd love to hear about this sibling. And when it got to church, they would say, "Boy, you should have seen my son the other night. He played really well in the game." And the people at church would say things like, "Man, that's wonderful. Tell us about the other one." And he would overhear these things, and it just got to be over about 15 years of that. It really started to work on him, and he began to think, there is no way I am good enough. I'll never be good enough. I don't belong. No one really wants me. Everyone wants my sibling. And that got to be overwhelming. And he ended up finding himself in the drug culture, because in the drug culture, acceptance is a given. If you will do drugs with us, you are accepted. There's no responsibilities here. We just kind of enjoy hanging out with you, and you don't have to do anything to earn our affection or fit in or anything. You just automatically fit in. It's a free pass. So whenever I consider origins, was one heavier or bigger than the other? Not to the individual. Again, these are highly, in my opinion, these are highly individualized. That's my opinion and my experience. We have these incidents that kind of happen, and we're left with usually very little interpretation. I got shot down when I asked her out, and now I'm just kind of left to interpret that on my own. So I walk away thinking maybe I'm a loser, or I walk away from that job interview that I didn't get thinking maybe I'm not good enough somehow. And I go through this interpretation process. Enough interpretations of the same flavor, those begin to get, they start to help me define who I am. So, kind of play this game. If I were to, you've maybe played the game Headbands, where you have like a little card up here on top that says long neck, and everyone goes, "Well, you have a long neck," and maybe it says spots, and you got some spots that are brown. Right away, I start going, am I a giraffe? And I think sometimes we go through these events that may be good, they may be harmful. We experience a whole lot of different types of events, but these rough ones, you didn't get picked for a team. Yeah, they don't want to date you. This person said you're not hireable because you don't meet the qualifications. You got an F on that paper. And if I have all these things and I'm starting to interpret them myself, I'm going, am I a loser? Am I not good enough? Gosh, that's a reality I don't really want to live with. But if I feel it's true, this overwhelming experience, this evidence that I can't disagree with because they did say no, I did get a bad grade, I didn't get picked for the team, whatever the case is, I start to define myself by my experiences based on my interpretations. And that's where I see people really get into a bind. We have been interpreting things on our own without any insight, maybe from our parents or from God or from anybody else that might have a positive influence in our life. And we feel like this is starting to define who I am, and I really didn't want to be the person here that's not good enough. And my parents always told me I was good enough. It can be really confusing and really jarring for a person to consider those things. So, if you find yourself in any of these situations, you feel like maybe some things in life have been overwhelming, maybe you have a negative self-concept, or maybe you have some kind of consideration that you're struggling in some way, I would say take that seriously. If you know of someone in your social circles, at your church, even at your job and your family, take those people seriously, and offer what you can. But then I would advocate help them or help yourself seek mental health counseling. Seek out some form of interpretation for those events. Seek out some reparative work. See yourself, no matter what the evidence shows, see yourself as valuable enough. See yourself as worthwhile enough to go and invest some time in yourself. I can see in a lot of ways that it's been very beneficial, very fruitful for some people. I would say find a good mental health professional and do some work with them. I would advocate for you to interview this person. They don't own you. They don't own you at all. So if you have some questions for them, that's great. You guys need to have a fit together. You might want to know, could you help me? Maybe this person's particular experience lies along drug abuse, and you don't abuse drugs. So maybe you don't have something that you feel they could help you with. Or maybe this person is just coming out of divorce themselves, and they're very bitter and angry. Therapists go through this stuff, and so they may encourage you to just get a divorce, just cut and dry, go on. You might want to know that. You might want to know if this person's okay, if they're in a good spot. Maybe their family members, somebody just died and they're grieving themselves and they really can't help you with your grief right now. That's something that a therapist should be able to do, but I would say not all therapists would be able to tell you that. Some of them are struggling, and may or may not know it. So I would say interview this person. Get a feel for them. If you feel like, hey, after 1 or 2 or 3 interviews, I really can't work with this person, then maybe ask for a referral or consider talking to another therapist. Maybe you know a friend who's gone to divorce counseling and it worked really well for them, but this person's not a fit for you for some reason. And you're saying, hey, did you talk to anyone else before you found them? Or have you heard any names after you found them that you think might be beneficial? Because we didn't connect. A good therapist knows that counseling is very intimidating. Counseling can be powerful and transformative and can be wonderful, but it's also scary. I remember whenever I was in grad school, one of my professors, he said, do you know what the most difficult part about counseling is for the client? And we're all young, grad students. We don't have any clue because we haven't done any counseling yet. And he had been doing this for 40 years at this point, maybe more. He said the most difficult part is when their hand touches your office door and opens it for the first time, because they know there's no turning back now. They've driven themselves all the way there, and they know that now is the time that they're fixing to open themselves up and be vulnerable to someone. And they're saying to that person, I'm not sure if my way has failed, and I'm struggling with who I am. And so a good counselor is aware that you might be feeling some of that fear. And a good counselor has a very healthy respect for that. A really good counselor, I'm not saying I do all these well or perfectly, but a really good counselor won't leave you there. They'll encourage you to move beyond that and to go with them. So developing a process here that would result in mutual trust, where I could share some things with you that might be beneficial for you or have been beneficial for me in the past, and things that you would see would be beneficial. And I would have to encourage you to leave what's been comfortable, which can sometimes be pain. Sometimes pain is comfortable. So we would develop some trust over a period of time, and I would encourage that with anybody you see. Find somebody you trust and talk with them about the biggest things in life. The things that you should be able to tell your counselor anything. Things you and your spouse can't talk about, you should be able to talk about with your therapist. If there's somebody that, say, maybe you've disclosed something uncomfortable in the past and they didn't handle it well, your therapist should be able to do that. If they don't, you might look for a referral or somebody that you feel like, hey, your gut should tell you, I got to get out of here now. But that shouldn't be just because you're afraid. That should be something you can point to and say, this person handled that inappropriately, and I'm just not ready to trust somebody like that. The current situation of our times, one thing I definitely want to say is this too shall pass. I refuse to use the word new normal. I am ready to go and find something that's more comfortable than our new normal. I will fight through this for myself. As far as the pandemic goes, I've heard the word unprecedented so many times, which I think is kind of a power stripping word. We're really not living in unprecedented times. There's been pandemics before. There's been epidemics before. There's been plagues before. We have the Spanish influenza. We had the Black Plague, the bubonic plague. They had all these different things have gone across the earth. It seems like for the last 15 years we hear of a new one every year. And so far, I heard a doctor say this recently that was very encouraging. He said, your DNA has made it through all those things up to this point. So take heart. Take heart. You come from a hardy stock. So this is a good thing. And so I refuse to believe that this is the first and only time in history that we've ever gone through something extremely difficult. It may be the first time in our lifetime. I'm glad to concede that. But I think that we have a God on our side who is working for us, not against us. And he's going to work for our health. And he cares about those who are hurting. I will say in my mental health counseling, again, I find myself leaning towards the three-piece person, the body, mind, and spirit. And I have thrown all my chips in with the fact that Jesus can help this. I might not can help this person, but I know Jesus can help this person. So I hold out hope, right? I hold out hope in our pandemic. I hold out hope with our rioting and our protesting. I hold out hope that we will heal and that you will be strong and courageous and not be afraid. And here's why. There was a point in time in my life where I felt like I was really experiencing some dire circumstances. Some things were really going catastrophically wrong for me. This was in my early 30s, and I found myself experiencing heart palpitations and sweating at times I shouldn't sweat and feeling exhausted all the time. And I thought, diabetes runs in my family. I thought maybe I'm going diabetic. I don't have any idea. I thought maybe I'm having heart trouble. I'm experiencing all this. I went to the doctor and he said, look, I've looked over everything and there is nothing wrong with you. You're perfectly healthy. He said, so here's what I'm prescribing for you today. This is a good doctor. Here's what I'm prescribing for you today. I want you to walk out of my office knowing fully that you have the same spirit residing in you that raised Jesus from the dead. And that shook my world. I've professed it. I've lived it for all these years. I've talked about it. I've agreed with it. But at some point, I gave that up. I allowed the circumstances to overwhelm me. And so I want to encourage you today. Take courage in this. You have the same spirit within you that raised Jesus from the dead. If your marriage is struggling, you have a God that resurrects dead things and lives inside of you at the same time and wants good things for you. If your finances are struggling, if you're unhealthy, if you have past traumas or depression symptoms or anything like that, take heart that you have the same spirit in you that raised Jesus from the dead. I will say, as a church, I feel like we should kind of address this. One thing I see be beneficial for anybody is intimacy. So intimacy is whenever I allow someone to know me fully from the inside out. And that is not sexual intimacy. That's not what I'm encouraging. What I'm encouraging is authentic conversations. Allowing walls to come down where I share when I'm struggling also. I allow this person to share when they're struggling. And I don't hide behind the fact that we're Christians and everything's going to magically be better because we're Christians. We're not going to go through that. I know I just said that God works for all of our best, but that doesn't mean that he's going to give us a free pass on anything. If you read the New Testament, those Christians really had some significant struggles. Paul himself had some significant struggles. And so I'm not saying we get a free pass. I'm saying that God is on our side. There's a big difference. So whenever we're meeting with our church friends and our church family, just be honest about it. I'm struggling. Here's the ways I'm struggling. And then the church, I would encourage to support that person however they can. I might call them every day of the week and check on them. I might pray with them right then and there. It means one thing to a person when you say, I'll pray for you. It means something totally different when you wrap your arm around their shoulders and say, Dear God, and you keep going. And you take their struggle very seriously and you bring it to God. So I would say being transparent with each other, offering vulnerability to each other, offering support. This is what made the church what it has been for so long. If we read the New Testament, right, we see in Acts, these people, even in dark, difficult times, they met in each other's house daily. They broke bread together daily. This was not once a week all the time. Daily, they would say, come over here and let's pray. Daily, they would say, if you have a need, I will help you meet it. They would sell land for each other and just give the money away. That's unheard of in our time. I don't know anyone that does that. Maybe a few, but it's very rare. It's very rare that I just sell a $60,000 piece of property or a $200,000 piece of property and give the money to somebody next to me. I have seen that go really bad in the past, and I've seen people shy away from it. So I want to encourage you, as brothers and sisters, treat each other this way. Treat each other with open arms and strong love for each other. I think we also all have personal ownership in this. God's not going to give us a free pass just because he loves us. Our church can't do everything for us. I may need some help, and I may have to help myself sometimes. So, some things I've seen be very beneficial in virtually any circumstance is purpose, one. When God created you on the earth, he did not create you haphazardly or accidentally or incidentally, none of those things. He purposed you. Now, if we read the account of Genesis, he speaks some of these things into existence. Let there be light. With man and with woman, he puts his hands on this person, and he stretches their fingers out, and he forms their bodies, it says. He elongates their neck, and he draws hair out, and then he breathes their life into them. He breathes the life of God into these people. That's a whole different concept. And so whenever we read in Jeremiah, who struggled, read Jeremiah. You're among people that struggle if you read Jeremiah. He says to him, when I formed you, before I formed you in your mother's womb, I knew who you were. He formed Jeremiah just like he formed Adam and Eve. And I'm suggesting to you, for your consideration, that he formed you too. So I would say he probably did that with intent, because you came out not looking like a carbon copy. He didn't cookie cutter you. He formed you the way you are to be who you are. Now, who is that? And that's the purpose he has you here for. So I would encourage you to seek his guidance on that. Maybe seek your church family's guidance on that. What do they see in you? But that purpose, I have seen that transform lives because it overwhelms the evidence I was looking at prior to this. I would encourage people to get a hobby. I love doing leather work. It gives me something I can do when I'm home other than watching TV or eating cookies or getting exhausted with something. I can sit down and create something, and I find that to be very meaningful. Being participatory in the creative process, I really believe connects us to the Father and connects us to his creative process. So I would encourage you to find a hobby that works for you. I would encourage you to find a hobby that works for you for your body, another hobby for your mind, and another hobby for your spirit. Definitely. And then I would encourage also taking account these evidences that we see and looking at our interpretation. Jesus says that Satan is the father of lies, i.e., there was no such thing in the cosmos until he gave conception to it. Perhaps he's been doing that with you. Maybe he's been telling you that you don't match up. Maybe he's been telling you that you're a loser, or you don't fit in, or something's not right about you. I've known people in the past that have said, there's something fundamentally different about me. There wasn't. They were a perfectly healthy person. But they had seen the evidence, and there's a lie that came along with it that was influential in the interpretation. And so I would encourage you to look for those lies and expose them for what they are. That is not me. That's not who I am, and I refuse to live that way. He also says, I think in Revelation, that Satan is the accuser of the brethren. So if you hear the voice of accusation, know exactly where that's coming from, and that those accusations are probably lies. They don't belong to you. And then I ask you, if you would, just to pray about your purpose and ask God to help you fulfill that. I think being action-oriented on any of these things would help anybody in any kind of difficult circumstance. There's plenty more to say. I want to finish with, I told you I threw all my chips in with Jesus on this thing, and the reason is this. In this world, we know we're going to go through trouble. The Bible's pretty clear about that. The present circumstances are pretty clear about that. What I read is Jesus is announcing his ministry to the world. And he opens up with Isaiah chapter 61. He opens the scroll and he starts reading, and he says, I've come to bind up the brokenhearted and to set the captive free. And I have known lots of people who are brokenhearted. I've known lots of people who feel captive to the position that they're in. They feel imprisoned by something. They feel shackled to something, maybe a memory, maybe some kind of pain. And I know that Jesus has already addressed that and said, that's what I've come for. I'm not going to be mild-mannered about it. I'm going to help you fight through this, and we're going to get freedom for you. And so that has been a very encouraging passage for me. I've seen it be very powerful and encouraging for others, and I want to encourage you with that too. If there's anything that we can do for you over at our office, we would be glad to. And we wish you the very best and hope that things will go well for you in the future. We would love to see Believe Church do wonderful. We hear good things about it all the time. With that, we're going to leave you, and I appreciate your opportunity to give me to speak to you, and we wish you the very best.